Hello people and welcome to Not Another Top 10. Today we're looking at the Sega Saturn, a console at the time which divided opinion, so let's look back as we do. So these are the top lists which I have used, and these are the people who they're from. And so for our top 10 we will not be using any of the games on this list. So let's get into it, my own top 10. So starting off my top 10, at 10 we have... Wait a minute. Just 1 minute, look at this list of games. So we hear people today complain about the ideal of microtransactions. Well, it's nothing new. Before the addition of the internet access allowing for live charge to happen in games, we had arcade cabinets. These games would be designed to offer players generally shorter experiences for a single denomination, 50p from where I came from when I was that younger, but now generally about £1. So the games were designed to allow skill to take you so far, but would require either dedication to learn the game or lots of lives. Either way, the consoles were made for that in mind. They were made to make money through the principles of microtransaction. Some greats have come out of the arcade cabinets, but gaming by this time was making an evolution from a pick up and put down sort of fun time to offering central entertainment within the house, and these games offered nice paddings for consoles, but they were no longer good enough to be the central selling point for the more mature, full-time gamer. This was the generation where you were allowed to be a gamer. It was generally accepted, lots more people were doing it, and it took up a lot more people's time. So which of these games were originally an arcade game, ported over to Sega? Oh well, that's many of them gone straight off the bat. I mean, if you want a nice comparison, let's take Daytona USA. The game was released on the Saturn in 1995. 2 years later, Sony came out with Gran Turismo, showing that someone was getting it. Or if you want a like-for-like comparison, we had Wipeout, a game that was released that showed what the consoles could do and offered something not seen before. It wasn't something chopped up from the arcade cabinets and put across. It had a more of a wanting to invest your time into it sort of game, because it was a good demo piece for the console. Daytona was already 2 years old by the time it got its Saturn release, being released 2 years previously on the arcades. The next big group of games that make up the list is the Panzer series of games. These games offered, in my mind, nothing new to gaming. They were on a rail shooter and offered gameplay aimed towards the newcomer, but with a story written out that they thought the experienced players would play. I mean, if you watch this clip from Panzer 2. Notice that you do not need to aim in this game. You wave your aim near them, it auto-locks, and you just shoot, meaning that learning the levels was by far more important than any skills needed, as you don't have to aim in the game, it's just a rail shooter. Yet people felt that this game was good enough to even spend time talking about, and yes, Star Fox was the same childish gameplay, but had a childish theme to go with it, and gave it that unique style that we've all come to learn to love from Nintendo. But, I know, at least at that time, Nintendo weren't lying to themselves. So time for the generic JRPG that seems to make all these lists, so a nice easy one for me. Albert Odyssey. This game was originally programmed for the Famicom, the console from the previous generation, and offers nothing new in the style of gameplay. It does have a good story, but what makes the game even worse in its technical showing, being of course designed for an older console, is, do you remember that joke about how JRPGs just extend their gameplay artificially by hiking the difficulty curve? Well, this game does it all in one go, fairly near the end. So you'll play loads of the game, you'll invest loads of your time, and then you'll have to go back and do a grind. Good JRPGs have evolved upon this by offering almost side-like stuff to get involved with, but this really was stuck in the old days of just do the same fight over and over and over and over and over again until you're ready to get past this part. And the fact that they put it right in at the end demonstrates that they probably designed the game, played it, thought it wasn't long enough, and then popped in a few extra zeros on the last enemies that you fight. I mean, this game was released in 1996. I mean, if you're just 1 year later, the PlayStation, Saturn's main rival of course, released the Final Fantasy VII. Do I need to explain the differences here about why, if you're a child in school and you were championing this JRPG, you might not stand too much of a chance against anyone who owned a PlayStation 1. Next we have Shining Force 3, old Metal Jesus. You've put a curveball here, because for me the gameplay I found to add extra twists to the RTS genre that already existed, and added good characters and a better story. But if we're talking about what we should be in collectors collecting, here this is an arse of a pick for someone to have advise you to pick. The game was a 3-part game, and I'm not sure about America, but in Europe we got one. We got the first one, this one, Shining Force 3. There are emulated versions that are translated, and you can get a complete playthrough in this way. But for the game, it's very pernickety, and you're going to have to do some digging to find them. And if you're a collector, it just doesn't exist. So this is a game which you can play if you want to play, and you speak the same language as I do. But you're going to finish the game off feeling that there should be more. And yes, there was more. If you put all 3 together and you go through the work, it's worth it. But I can't put it on a top 10 list because we're talking about top 10 Saturn games here. So purely on the Saturn, only being able to play 1/3 of the game is ridiculous. And as much as I love you, Metal Jesus, it was a pretentious pick. Guardian Heroes is again a game I remember enjoying, but after another bit of play, I don't know what to make. Comparing it to games like Streets of Rage, you end up asking yourself, why is this not 3D? I mean, it runs on rails that you have to jump between and makes the fighting purely 2D. Compared with the way attacks worked, this put this on par with 2D beat-em-ups, and if you want that challenge, much better can be found in the likes of Street Fighter series at the time. The battle game, which adds additional gameplay after the game, allows you to use any character in the game, but again, due to limitations on the game, this means that each moveset for the character boils down just to a few moves that you have to spam. Concentrating on fewer characters and bigger move lists would have made this game actually worthy on the list. It makes lists because Saturn had poor offerings, and this was about the best that they could do. Nights into Dreams. It's a good reason to champion the Saturn, and if you have a Saturn, it's a game that you should have, but it will make you ask the question of, oh, Sega, why did you keep pushing Sonic as much as you did when you could write games like this with the same theme? But twist it up quite a bit, and it made for a lot more enjoyable game than what any of the Sonic series was on the console. And that leaves us with Dragonforce, a game which... Alright, I really like Dragonforce game. But I'm a fan of JRPGs, and this mixes in RTS and 2D fighting very well. And it's a nice mix of all of them, good story, good and all that. But then again, we're talking about games that are champion consoles here, and look at it, I think it still proves my point. Bomberman. Well, it's Bomberman. We know what Bomberman is. You know that little calculator watch that you had in school if you were born in the 80s or 70s? Well, that had a version of Bomberman on it. Download a Saturn just to play Bomberman, or buy a Saturn just to play Bomberman? Well, no. If I'm going to think of all the Bombermans to recommend, I don't even think that Saturn would get close. It's a party game, and if you want party gaming, you probably would have to buy an N64 instead of a Saturn. Well, I'm not going to put this game down specifically. It's not really a standout game that you would expect to appear on a top 10 list, which again I think just shows the dubious nature of the Saturn. Shinobi! Well, Shinobi X, that's the one that they've put on this list, so let's get this correct. So this isn't Shinobi Legions, which is being recommended, which was the American release, which is a very easy to get hold release. What they're recommending is that you get hold of is Shinobi X. A quick show to show you why that might be a problem. The big difference between the two games is just the soundtrack, but the soundtrack is something that goes into a game, so you're going to need the soundtrack to make a game worthwhile. So let's look at Shinobi X. Well, look at that price. The other thing that will make people generally laugh about Shinobi is digitized sprites, which were filmed by real people, and Mortal Kombat was known for, in quite a funny, joking way, and it got away with it just about. But today you just notice how janky they are and how poor the animation movements are as when you strike a button compared to simplifying against just a standard sprite and how that would move. The slight delay in controls as well. If you look at the enemies, you will understand why this just isn't used anymore. But anyway, Shinobi X is recommended to you, and if you want to get that one, it's only going to cost you, what, $90? £90? Resident Evil. This was out a previous year on the PlayStation, making it old hat by this time. But if you want to play the game, then the PX version looks better. But also there was a 2002 re-release that added parts the original game cut out. The Saturn does have one big favour over the PlayStation, and that is the battle mode, adding some extra content over the PlayStation's version. But then again, when I say Resident Evil, you're gonna think PlayStation platform over Saturn, because it was one of the original poster boys that PlayStation used to market their console, rather than the more backseat that Sega gave it. A little side story, when I bought a PS one, I remember the games that were recommended to me were the games that I brought, and I brought it from Electronics Boutique, and the games were recommended through just their general training. But the games that got recommended for me on that one was Tomb Raider, Resident Evil, and I can't remember what the third game is that I actually got at the time. I think it may have been Wipeout. But all around the Electronics Boutique store, there was, for the PlayStation, seems to have been pushing this side of games. I mean, this should make Tomb Raider easy to cover. Well, yeah, but it's the best example to show you how much Sega just did not get the market changes at the time. Lara Croft was PlayStation's unofficial market prize. They pushed her behind Crash and Solid Snake to show off the console. Well, here's the shock. I had to search this a few times to make sure that I was reading this correctly, because even in my own mind, Tomb Raider, Sony. Tomb Raider, Sony. Lara Croft, Sony. But the Saturn Europe release of Tomb Raider was a month earlier than Sony's. But yet again, while Lara Croft was allowed to be pushed by Sony and took a front seat, Sega generally put these games a bit more on the back seat. And really, these are the games that should have been being pushed on their console, on their platform, to demonstrate that the move from the 4th generation to the 5th generation of home consoling had happened. So, in conclusion, that's why you should never worry about the Saturn either collecting or worry about emulating. The only lesson you will learn from this is how much Sega just did not deserve to be in the marketplace at the time. Their marketing was probably more along the lines of what Sony was doing, but their games were along the levels of more what Nintendo were offering in terms of complexity. So people buying this generally got a very disappointing performance. We wanted things that were different from Nintendo, but yet this reluctancy to push 3D gaming, to push investment gaming, to push gaming towards the adult markets, the use of 3D levels in games, it all just was demonstrated not to be here. And Saturn, if it was a 4th generation console and we were comparing to them, we were talking raves about it. But I think this really does demonstrate why the Saturn was the death of Sega. And I know the Dreamcast came after, but it was doomed purely from this console. I haven't bothered doing a top 10 because I don't want anyone to waste their time on the Sega Saturn, so you enjoy the world. And I hope you enjoyed that video where we cover the games that no one else wants to game. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video. Remember, if you want to be the completionist with your game knowledge and as we cover the things that other people don't cover, then we ask you to hit that big sexy subscribe button. So you go enjoy the world.